Welcome to another episode of Ask the Zamboni Experts. I'm your host, Doug Peters, and along with me today is a gentleman that I was lucky enough to watch play hockey growing up, Dennis Hextall. Dennis played with the Minnesota North Stars. He played with the LA Kings. He played with the New York Rangers, also with the Detroit Red Wings, and finished his career with the Washington Capitals. Welcome, Dennis, and thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be here, Doug, and hopefully we have fun for the next hour.
I'm hoping so. I know we will. Dennis, when did you first start playing hockey?
The first time I skated, I was 3 years old and on the Madison Square Gardens. My father played for the New York Rangers, and he's in the Hall of Fame. In fact, when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup back in the 40s, I'm not sure which year it was, but it was the early 40s. He led the league in scoring and scored the winning goal in overtime against Toronto for the New York to win the Stanley Cup. So we used to go down with him at practice, and every once in a while we'd get a chance to go on the ice. So I was 3 years old, skating on Madison Square Gardens.
That had to be quite a deal for a young lad from Poplar Point, Manitoba.
Oh, yeah. You know, we lived in, Poplar Point, maybe 500 people. And then you go to New York and slightly bigger.
So did you spend time growing up in Canada, Dennis, or was it more in the U.S. because with your father playing in the NHL?
No, he would go to training camp, and then he'd go to New York, get an apartment for us, and then Mom would take us there at my older brother and my younger brother the last year. So when I was 5, Dad retired, and we went, we lived in Poplar Point. That was our home. I mean, we lived there year-round except for when we went to New York.
That had to be quite an experience, seeing New York City the size of that in comparison to where you spent time after your dad retired.
Oh, yeah. It's unbelievable. You look at Manhattan, and because at that time, the guys basically, all the players in that, I think, stayed fairly close, and I know now most of the players that they have a practice rink, and they stay closer to that than they do to Madison Square.
When was the first time you saw a Zamboni machine?
Well, I'm not really sure. I remember they used to do it with the barrels in New York. They used to have the old barrels and then the cloth behind them on the rod hanging out both sides. That's the way they used to flood it. That would have been sometime, when we were just kids, I guess, that first saw Zambonis.
Okay.
I'm not even sure. I couldn't even guess.
It's interesting. I don't know if you know it or not, but Madison Square Garden was the last NHL team to go to a ice resurfacer it was a Zamboni machine, and that machine is up at an outdoor rink in a park in Michigan State, the state of Michigan. So we've seen some pictures of it, and it's got the Madison Square Garden logo on it, and it's up there in Michigan, and maybe if you get the opportunity, you'll run across it going through the woods on one of your hunts.
What town is it in?
I'm going to have to do some digging, and I'll send you a text or an email and let you know. But I think we've also got some photos of it that Paula can probably extract for us and get sent to you. That's in our archives. But I think you'll find it kind of interesting. It's been we try to track the machines, and that was a unique machine in that it didn't dump because of the height of Madison Square Gardens where they parked the machines. They had very low ceilings, so they went with a non-dumping machine, and they were the last ones. And there's stories that I've heard, I don't know how accurate they are, about had to do with the unions not wanting to lose the jobs of the guys that were out there with the shovels and pulling the carts and such. So interesting stuff back then.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it was.
I saw on your Wikipedia page that you went to the University of North Dakota, and being a former Minnesotan and a Golden Gopher fan, it was kind of disturbing that a talented guy like you wouldn't choose the U of M over University of North Dakota. But what was it like playing hockey back in UND at that time, and how did you choose going to UND to play hockey?
Well, at that time, the coach of UND was Barry Thorndicraft. And Barry had played junior hockey in Winnipeg, St. Boniface Canadiens, and my dad coached them the 1 year, and they went to the Memorial Cup. And then Thorndicraft, after junior, I'm not sure what he did. He never played pro, to my knowledge, but he ended up as a coach of North Dakota, and they had a very good team. And he was down there, and I was lucky. I come out of junior. I had 4 offers. One of them was the University of Minnesota. Mariucci had offered me. They took 1 Canadian a year, so I had a full ride down there if I wanted it. I had a full ride at Denver, and I had a full ride in North Dakota and Michigan Tech. And at that time, those were the powerhouses. But I knew all the guys going to North Dakota, and I knew we'd have a hell of a team, which we did. So the one year we ended up in first place, and Michigan Tech was second. And the next year, we were second, and Michigan Tech was first. And I know Tech won the Final Four when we went to that. Tech won it. We played, I think, against Boston, and played the whole game in their end, but couldn't score goals. So it was just one of those things. We ran into a hot goaltender, and they beat us, and then Tech whitewashed them the next night. Gophers and Denver were the 2 big rivalries at North Dakota.
And did you get any grief? I remember as a kid going to the Met Center with my dad, and he had to be there well before game time, and I was just a young kid and was able to sit in the stands and watch John Mariucci hold court with several of the people. He was an older man at the time. Did he give you any grief when you were with the North Stars about choosing UND over the University of Minnesota?
No, John never said anything. He was pretty much a gentleman. In fact, when I first got traded from Oakland to Minnesota, and I had to go in there and sign a contract, talk to Ren Blair and all that, Mariucci is the one that picked me up at the airport. And, my father had played against him. And so John was, I'm sure if I had gone to Minnesota, I would have enjoyed it. But I chose the other route. And Denver, if I had taken a trip, like today the kids can take, I think, 3 trips. But if I had taken a trip out to Denver, I would have went there. I mean, I get out there in the mountains and stuff. I would have been just perfectly, but I didn't. So I went to the old flat state of North Dakota where you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. So.
That's pretty funny. Now, you said you played in a Quonset hut. Was this pre the old Ralph Engelstad Arena then? Pre the new Ralph Engelstad Arena?
Correct. Yeah. It was, if it was 10 below outside, it was 10 below inside. It was just a huge Quonset hut. I don't know how many people it sat. Not a lot. Not like today's arena. And so, like North Dakota's arena today has got to be the nicest arena in the U.S. I mean, you come out of that in college hockey and go to some of the pros. I mean, I don't think they can touch what they have off the ice as far as facilities go. I mean,
so I take it you've been to the new Ralph and taken a look at that facility.
Oh yeah, I've been in it several times. I was there for the grand opening when they brought it out, and they had the family out in center ice. And he said, as long as I'm alive, he says they'll never change the name. Of course, he passed away, and the name got changed. I don't know how you go from the Fighting Sioux to the Fighting Hawks. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That was and still is a great college program. I mean, North Dakota's they're always in it. They had a lull, I know, after I left, and Rube Jorkman took it over, and they went downhill there for about 6-7 years. And then Gino Gasparini, who was a freshman my last year, he brought the program back, and it's been solid ever since.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Gino Gasparini and Dean Blaze, who just got elected into the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame. One of my first trips up there, I think it was probably 1989. I go up and walk into the building and knock on a door, and there are 2 guys. There's probably 3 or 4 of them that were in there, and 2 of them were in their boxer shorts, and one was Gino and one was Dean, and they're playing poker or some kind of card game. And they looked at me, and I'm this young kid, and they're going, "What do you want?" And I said, "Oh, I'm here from the Zamboni Company." But just Gino is a great gentleman, and I'm very happy to see Dean get elected to the Hall of Fame, because he was a great guy. He coached up at Roseau for a while, and a friend of my dad's, his kid played up there, and just a great program. Great program.
Yeah, and they draft, they draft a lot of Canadian kids, and they generally take 1 or 2 kids out of Winnipeg pretty near every year. Like they've got I think North Dakota has turned more guys into the NHL than any other school.
Well, they've got some great kids that have come out of there. One of them, the great Christian family, Dave Christian, whose nephew now is playing for the Islanders, Brock Nelson, the grandson of Billy Christian. So I got to give him a lot of credit. And then one of your line mates, JP Parisi, his two kids, Zach and I forget what the goalie's name was. They both went up there and played at UND. So
I think the goalie was Joe.
Yeah.
And
great program, great facilities, great stuff.
Yeah, I was up in North Dakota. I saw both the kids play. So, and JP is likely one of the best left wingers I played with, if not the best.
And a great practical joker based on some stories that I heard from my father, and we'll maybe tap into those a little bit later down the conversation here. Dennis, you come from a big hockey family, and your dad, I saw today, your dad won a Stanley Cup, and you are now 3 generations. Is that correct? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, Dad was first, and then my older brother, Brian, and then his son, Ronald. Ronald played goal for Philadelphia for about, 12 years or so. And Brian, he played mainly in Pittsburgh and Atlanta. We all come up through the New York system simply because Dad was a Ranger. And back in those days when us kids turned junior, we would pick a team that was sponsored by an NHL team. There wasn't any free agency or anything like that. So when I was 18 and I went and played junior with Brandon, I was tied up with New York Rangers. So, and anybody on the team would be. And so that's how it was. There was no draft. You just come up through the junior ranks and then you turn pro. But anyway, Dad, after he retired, he went back home and we settled there. And then my older brother was considered one of the best juniors in Canada. And then I turned junior right after he did, after he left. He was in Brandon for 3 years. I was in Brandon for 2 years. And my younger brother was there for 2 years. So there was a Hextall on the Brandon Wheat Kings for 7 years in a row. But anyway, just growing up with all that. And I was small at the time. When my first year junior, I think I was maybe 5'9", 150 pounds. So it was a different game for me. But when I went to college, I think that's where things happened. A lot of guys that I had played with, they seemed to level off, and I kept, seemed to progressing. And and I only played 2 years of college. Freshman year, none of us could play, like in any sport. As a freshman, you had to sit out. So I played my sophomore and junior year, and then I left because what they brought in was that summer before that, they brought in a rule that if you played junior A hockey after you turned 20, you lost a year's eligibility. Well, I played 2 games in the playoffs against Edmonton my last year junior after I turned 20, so I lost a year's eligibility. But I was, like I said earlier, I had 4 offers, so North Dakota said, come on down, we're going to pay for 4 years. So away I went.
Well, there you go. And your brother played, he's a couple of years older than you, Brian, correct?
Yes.
And family competitiveness. I've got a couple stepdaughters who are soccer players. They're beyond college and high school. They're into having the grandkids for us now. How competitive was it growing up between you and your siblings?
We all competed in the sports, but we never hardly ever played against each other, because of the age difference. When we were back in Poplar Point, I had to play up with my brother. I played with him simply because we didn't have enough kids to have a lot of teams. So we had a league back home in Poplar Point, and you had, huge age differences, but the coaches tried to play the same age against the same age. But so line 1 would be, and then line 2, and everybody tried to get them at the ages where they'd be competitive and nobody getting hurt. So that was always part of it. So actually, as a youngster, scoring for me was, forget about it, because most of my time I was just trying to check somebody. So, but it was interesting, and God knows we had enough ice time. We were on the ice pretty every night.
Did you have a rink in your backyard that you were able to skate on, or was this at the community rink?
Well, we had a community rink, was open air, and then when my father retired and stuff, they built a closed-in arena, and it was all local help and labor. And I know Dad, he built a lumber yard, and that's what he ran when he retired. He supplied most of the material, then they paid him back as they went along. But so I never really got to play on a closed-in arena until I went to Brandon. That was it. But even playing juvenile back home, I was in the open air and closed arena, sort of a combination. But we were, as soon as it froze outside on creeks or ponds or anything, us guys were skating. And then once they got the ice flooded inside the arena, we were on the ice, like I say, pretty every night.
Now, in comparing the stats between you and your brother Brian, do you get to gloat a little bit when it gets together for family functions, or do you just kind of let that slide that you scored more goals than he did?
It's sort of like politics. You just sort of leave it alone.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I've been told by some friends of mine that I have a tendency to lead with my chin, so I haven't learned that political correctness that you exercise with your family.
No,
that's awesome.
We leave it alone, and we know. And actually, we played together on the same line in Minnesota for about 15, 20 games, and he was going along. He was doing about a point a game. I remember we're getting ready one night to play Philadelphia, and he comes in. He says, "Oh, it'll be a tough one tonight. They're going to come." And I said, "They won't bother you." I said, "Just relax." I said, "Just go out there and have fun." I says, "You got Goldsworthy on one side, and I'm in the middle." I said, "They'll leave you alone." So I said, "They're afraid of Goldie," and I said, "They know what I can do. So just go out and play the game."
That's a different era back then, and I can remember the Broad Street Bullies, and I can remember a few of the times you stood up for the North Stars and took on Dave Schultz and a few others. And I was able to meet him later in life after he was done playing hockey. He actually ran an ice rink down in the Philadelphia area, and ran into him at a trade show. And that guy had hands they looked like sledgehammers. The size of those hands, I've never seen anything like that, other than we had a guy worked at a bowling alley that had huge fingers that were like sausages when you try to put a ring on them. So
yeah, you know what? And Schultz was one of the nicest guys you wanted to meet off the ice. He was A1, and I've done a couple of things with him. I actually did a signing with him, and he's A1. And on the ice, he was the backbone of Philly. He was the only. I got to be honest, he was the only tough one, until they finally, towards the end of my career, they got a couple of bigger guys. But when they were really going, and the Broad Street Bullies, and Broad Street Bullies is really the way, I'm going to say Fred Sherrill was the best coach I ever had. And Sherrill had a way of getting everybody on the team to stick up for each other. And that's where that came from. When they beat Boston for the Stanley Cup, if you want to go player for player, they couldn't compare to Boston with talent, but they sure in the hell compared to them as far as work ethic and everything else, because things used to come easy for Boston. But Philadelphia, they, with Clark as the guts of it, everything, making everybody work and stuff. But Schultz was a guy, when it got going, he was the one right in the middle of it and doing it all. And he would go after, I used to get going with him. I don't know, I had 3 or 4 fights, but all of a sudden, our line used to lead the North Stars in scoring. I'm sitting in the box with a guy that scored 10 goals a year. And that's the way they beat you. They had a way of doing it. And I still think it was Fred Sherrill, the coach. He's the one that put it all together.
Yeah, that was an interesting team. And I was looking at your stats to reminisce a little bit. And 72-73, you scored 30 goals, had 52 assists for 82 points, and spent 140 minutes in the penalty box, which is that's 7 periods of hockey in the penalty box, not getting to play. And maybe there could have been some, if you had a game misconduct in there, that's not factored into that time. So those are pretty incredible stats. And I didn't look back to see MVP race of that year, but I'd have to think that you would have been in the running with those numbers.
You mean for the league?
Yes.
Boy, I don't even know. I don't think I was. But I know my year in Oakland, like I'd bounced around for 2 or 3 years and couldn't really get up and stay up, with New York. But then once I got traded from New York to LA, LA to Montreal, Montreal to Oakland. And when I got in Oakland, I thought, boy, I got to do something to make a spot here. And I think that year I'm not sure, but I think I had 22 majors.
Wow. Well, yeah, 217 minutes. I'm looking at the stats right now. 21 goals, 31 assists, 52 points, and 217 penalty minutes.
Yeah, and I led the team in scoring out there and also in penalties and stuff. And but I established a lot of people by the end of the year, they'd hesitate going in the corners with you. And that's all you needed. You just needed that 1 second to get in there ahead of them and get control of the puck and then do what you're going to do. So when I got traded to Minnesota the next spring, I think Minnesota, they thought they were drafting a tough third line centerman, and it ended up being tough first line centerman.
Sure.
And so it just went from there. And then like the first year in Minnesota, I had the knee operation, so I didn't do much. But after that, I pretty well led the team until I got traded.
Dennis, how special was it for you in looking back at these? Your first game in the NHL was with the team that your dad played for and helped to win a Stanley Cup in the last Stanley Cup that they won until Messier came in, that led to the chant, all those years when the Islanders were winning of 1941. How special was it for you to be able to put on that the jersey of the Rangers that your dad was wearing?
Oh, gee, I wanted to play in New York. That's where my goal was, to be a regular with the New York Rangers. And after I got traded, I damn near, I think, was ahead of all their centermen as far as scoring, and that went. Once I got established in Oakland and then Minnesota, I could compete with any of their centermen. I remember going in there one night, we beat them 5-4 or something, and I had a goal and 4 assists. And I was playing, Henry Boucher was on our line. He had a goal. I think Henry ended up scoring the winning goal that night. But I just sort of would chuckle to myself saying, okay, you buggers traded me. Good. We'll make it look good on you. And I know when we were in Oakland, we beat them twice that year, and both times I scored the winning goal. So it used to pump me up playing against them, but I wish I would have played with them, for 10, 12 years.
Sure. What was your time like? You only spent a season with the California Golden Seals. Was Charlie O'Finley still the owner of the team at that time? And what was it like playing out in Oakland?
Charlie Finley, well, put it this year, or this way. When I got traded to Oakland, I'm going, oh, hell, because I actually was in LA for maybe 18 games, and I did not fall in love with that city. So anyway, when I got traded to Montreal and then back to Oakland, I'm going, oh, geez, not the West Coast again. But Freddie Glover was the coach out there, and Frank Selke and Bill Story were the GM and assistant GM. And I, for the first time, really got an opportunity to play. And I'd played against Freddie Glover when he was in the American Hockey League, but when we went out there, he treated me A1, and I had a hell of a year as far as I was concerned, because I led the team, and like I think you just said, I had 21 goals and assists and all that stuff. But that got me an opportunity, and suddenly I get traded to Minnesota, which has got, Montreal beat them out in the playoffs that year, but Minnesota took them to 6 games or something like that. But it was, for me, great. But Charles Finley, anytime he came to town, I used to get tapped on the shoulder to go to whatever he was doing, like he was, trying to promote the team and everything. So I get treated A1. I mean, I can't complain. In fact, I was sort of disappointed when I got traded to Minnesota because I didn't know what was going to happen there. So, but anyway, it turned out being a real good opportunity for me. You go from guys that are scoring 10, 12 goals on your wings to Goldsworthy and Freesy score, I think Goldsworthy had 48 one year. Freesy didn't have to worry about it. One of the best left winger checkers that I've seen, and just a tough, hard-nosed player.
Dennis, you mentioned, and I didn't realize I didn't have these in proper sequence, but you played for the Kings, which was a customer of ours back in that era, and they are again today. What was that like in LA with a different marketplace trying to introduce hockey? And it's way different today than it was when you played out here. And I'll tell you, from my perspective, it's really changed a lot when Gretzky came here. But what was it like playing at the Great Western Forum, where all those great Laker teams were the primary draw?
Well, the facility was great and everything else. It was tough living there, and they didn't have a good team, and it was, I made the team, et cetera, et cetera. 20 games, I think, was second on the team in scoring. I get sent down to the minors. So I was in Springfield for 10 games, and for the 10 games I'm there, I'm leading the team in goals and assists and stuff. And then I got in a fight with Butch Bouchard, that night. We ended up beating the Voyagers. And anyway, Butch was cross-checking me from the back, and I turned around and I caught him right in the butt in the first punch. And down he goes, and then I give him another one. And the next day, I'm traded to Montreal. So I go to Montreal and have a meeting with Sammy Pollock, which lasted about 5 minutes. And he says, we're going to do this, this, and this. Go and have fun. So anyway, I go out, I play with them, and my wingers are Larry Mickey and Mahavlich. So, and I have never been on a stronger hockey club in my life. I mean, that team was just loaded. Mark Tardif, for John Houle, Guy Lapointe, Butch Bouchard, everybody, the whole team the next year was in the NHL.
So you're dealing with one of the right before they became, well, they probably still were at that time as well, but all of those guys are names I can remember. I remember seeing the Mahavlich brothers and Yvan Cournoyer and Kenny Dryden as a great goalie, and got to talk a little bit with Tommy Reed about his goal that he scored on a penalty shot against Ken Dryden, and what a treat that was as a kid to hear about.
Yeah, well, it was unbelievable. Then right at the end of the season, the Canadians are allowed to take up 5 guys as support for the playoffs. Well, they called 5 guys up, and it just stripped the team, But anyway, we ended up losing to Buffalo, and Fred Sherrill was a coach there at the time, and that's where I played with him. But then the next year, or that summer, I got traded to Oakland along with Ernie Hickey, and it was for a first-round draft pick who ended up being Guy Lafleur. But that's how Montreal used to do that. They trade the kids away, or not the kids. They'd trade away players that they didn't think would help their big team, and it always went for draft picks. And so every year they traded with Oakland, figuring Oakland's not going to do very well. And we had a horrible team in last place, but first round pick, Guy Lafleur. And they did that year after year.
And that's one of the reasons I think the NHL made rules about trading draft picks, because the weak teams that needed to get the young players were trying to trade for more experienced players, and it ended up biting them in the backside usually in the long run.
Oh yeah, for sure. And take a look at my nephew Ronald. Like, he was in Philadelphia doing, working for the organization. Then he went out to LA as assistant GM, and they had the worst team in the league at that time. 5 years later, they won the cup, but they won it over the draft picks. You know, they got Quick and goal. They just filled it in. Then at the end, they filled in with 2 or 3 guys that they knew out of the Philadelphia system. Bingo, they won the cup. And look at Philadelphia today. They were doing real well. Most of it is the young kids that are on the team, and the one who's drafted them is Ronald. He filled that team up with young kids and good ones.
Yeah, and that's usually the secret, and you have to get all of the guys the window of opportunity. They all have to come together, sprinkle in a few seasoned veterans to give them some playoff experience, and then win. And it's interesting to me to see this year's 2 Stanley Cup finalists. They are in non-traditional hockey markets, if you want to say that these days. But Dallas against Tampa, who would have thought that back when you were playing in the 70s?
Yeah, it's different, but that's just the way it is. And those are good organizations, and it comes from the top down. Like Yzerman built up Tampa Bay, and I think Jimmy Nill, who's out of the Detroit system, is down running Dallas.
Dennis, in 71, 72, I noticed that you played a little bit of time down in Cleveland, and I'm going to assume that was rehab time. You said you had knee surgery. Is that correct?
Yes. The first year I was in Minnesota.
Okay. What was your favorite minor league city that you played in? You played in Knoxville, Omaha, Buffalo, Springfield. Which of those cities is closest to your heart for a favorite place to play?
I would say Buffalo. My second year, I played in Knoxville my first year out of college, and I had a good time there. It was East Coast Hockey League. The next year, I went to camp, and I was going to Omaha, and I had a bum knee. So I went home for about a month and come back there. And then Jake Milford, who was our GM in junior in Brandon, he was down there running it. And I couldn't get any ice time. For some reason, he wouldn't play me. So anyway, Buffalo had an injury. So Fred Chura calls me up, and, so I get sent up to Buffalo, and all of a sudden, I played 50 games, and I think I had 50 points, and I ended up second in the Rookie of the Year. So getting out of Omaha was great. So Omaha wasn't one of my favorites, and Buffalo was. I ended up playing there the last half of one year and most of the next year. And in fact, I was leading the league in scoring. I got called up with New York, and then I got sent down, and then called up again. And I go up there. We beat Boston. We blew them up, and I had a goal and 2 assists and first star. And then the next 2 or 3 games, I could hardly get on the ice. Then back to Buffalo. So I would still say Buffalo was my favorite minor league team.
And I'm going to assume the time with the Red Wings, with your involvement with their alumni, that Detroit might be your favorite city that you played in the NHL, or would New York be higher on that list?
Minneapolis. I really enjoyed playing with the North. Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I was, in a way, I sort of created the trade, but I was disappointed too when I left there. My wife's from there, the family, and everything was good there. It was an easy city to get around and travel, and I got treated pretty good there. So I was disappointed, I guess, in the management. I thought the management made some bad trades and let the team go down. I mean, we weren't picking up real good draft picks to fill in, because the team didn't change much from the day I got there to the day I left. So you've got to have good draft picks. And I don't know about their scouting staff or some of them. And the same thing when I got to Detroit. I mean, they were getting number 1 pick, period, number 1. And they're having trouble getting a kid to be able to play. So it's you've got to pay attention to running your organization. And That's why Detroit, they ended up selling. Norris ended up broke. And look, Mike Ilitch takes it over, and look what he's done. They had an organization, for 18 years we're in the playoffs. But when you're up at the top every year, it's hard to get a number one draft pick that's going to just come in and really be a key player for your team.
Yeah, it's very tough, and it's one of the things I look at with teams who are in the middle, where they struggle because they're just good enough to make the playoffs. They're not going to be good enough to really be a contender unless something just spectacular happens. And you need to go down, and that's like the LA Kings did that. They hit the bottom for a while, got hit well on draft picks, had everybody come together. And other teams, Chicago Blackhawks, were a very similar story. When they got Taves and Kane, that really changed the team. And you have to hit on a first-round draft pick. If you don't, you're going to struggle, and you're not going to be very good. And you can take a look at it doesn't impact you necessarily that year, but you can look 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and that is what causes teams to not be able to play very well if they miss on a first-round draft pick, because that's your pipeline.
Yeah, you gotta make sure that your first pick is the best available.
Well, you mentioned a little bit about the trade that you kind of forced your way out of Minnesota. I'm hoping that there was something to that, because nothing against Bill Hogaboom, but he was not a Dennis Hextall, not in my mind, and not in the guy I got to watch as a kid, and having you as an instructor at North Star hockey camps when I was a little kid as well. So what is there more to that story as to why you wanted to get out of Minnesota?
No, they had started making some bad trades. They take our best defenseman and they trade him to Atlanta, Barry Gibbs, and we get two guys, Dean Talifas, and I blame Walter Bush in that. Like, Walter Bush come out and he said, "I want to have an All-American team." There wasn't 20 good U.S. kids in the league. So how's he going to get an All-American team? And he's trading away, what I thought was a real quality defenseman in Barry Gibbs, and he gets two guys that are very questionable. Then they go and they get, I think it was King from L.A. I forget who they give away. They trade away J.P. Verries and Jude Druin for two guys that really weren't going to help your team. I mean, when you start making trades like that, your team just goes downhill. And you go in the dressing room and the guys that have been there are going, holy, what's going on? And like you said, Hogaboom, I mean, I don't think he could carry my jock strap at times. So I just look at it and say they just destroyed that franchise, but that was part of it.
Yeah, it was a different era back then. And I also look at it in, hindsight's always 20/20. But and there are other teams that passed on Bobby Clarke as well. But and again, nothing against Dennis O'Brien. He was a serviceable defenseman, tough guy. But if the North Stars would have drafted Bobby Clarke, who knows what things would have been like at that point in time.
Oh yeah, for darn sure. And that's why I don't think they do their homework. I mean, if Bobby Clarke had a problem medically there, go check with him and see the family and everything. See what's going on, how these kids come up and everything else. You've got to, like my nephew Ronald, when he's drafting kids, he drafts a Russian kid. He gets on an airplane, flies to Moscow. They pick him up. He goes to the family's home, visits them. When they're all done, comes back to the airport and flies home. But he wouldn't draft the kid unless he met him and met the family. And that's the way he operates. And that's why a lot of the teams that he's been with really do well, because he is very conscientious, loves the game, and just goes forward. And you have to do that. And Detroit didn't do it, and Minnesota, I don't think, did it.
Yeah, it was a different world back then. And I can remember when Lou Nanne was wrapping up his career and then getting involved with it. And it was the so close you can taste it when they lost in '81 to the Islanders in the Stanley Cup Finals. And then they replaced what I called the guys that were the grinders, the heart, and went for a bunch of talent. And talent doesn't necessarily win if it doesn't have any heart.
Yeah, somebody's got to go get the puck, and if you get rid of the grinders, you know, you're losing all that. And the thing is, not that Louis built up the team. That's when Cleveland, the Gunn brothers, had Cleveland. They brought Minnesota, and they merged the two teams. So you get the top players off each team, and then they had a great year. And then Louis starts his trading and traded the team away.
Yeah, it was a different time. It's interesting you talk about the trade with Barry Gibbs. It was Dwight Bialowas and Dean Talifas. And as a kid, my dad used to bring hockey players up to my grandparents' resort to fish. And the Canadians, for some reason, Canadian people think they know how to fish better than us Americans do. And I don't know what that's all about. But Dwight came up with his girlfriend, and she was catching fish left and right, and he couldn't catch something if it was tied to his line. But that was very, very interesting. Hey, one of the guys you got to play with, Dennis, is Buster Harvey. And maybe you could elaborate a little bit about Buster, and I'll give you a little bit of history on Buster. He came over to our house when I was a kid, and my parents cooked meals for some of the young guys who were away from home and maybe didn't have a good home cooked meal very often. And Buster ended up being our dealer, our Zamboni dealer for us out in the Maritimes. What do you remember about Buster and getting your opportunity to play with him?
Buster was handy around the net, but as far as being in the corners and playing a tough game, Buster wasn't there. That's a wrong nickname for him. They should have called him something else, because Buster's sort of a tough name. But he was fun to play with, and I played with him and Danny Grant, the two Tunas. And Danny Grant could score goals, and Buster was sort of an all-round player, but not tough. In fact, one night we're in Long Island, and it was an exhibition game, preseason, and Danny Grant and I aren't dressed. We're sitting out, and Buster's out there playing, and I don't know what happened, but him and Bobby Nystrom got into it, and that wasn't even a fair fight. Nystrom hit him, so his hands had to be sore after hitting him so many times. But anyway, we go in the dressing room after the game, and Buster said, "I'll bet you he's sore for the next 2 weeks." He says those hands of his couldn't take a pound. He says, "I stopped everything." Buster was a funny kid, and that's one thing. And then when I got traded to Detroit, he was my winger too. So I've played quite a bit with him, and him and I got along. And now I know why he was a little chubby. Your mother was overfeeding him.
Well, he was a great guy. Sad to see him go a little bit early. And you got to play with Danny Grant, who was he scored 50 goals back when scoring 50 goals meant an awful lot, because it didn't happen very often. And
he had 50 in Detroit. He was playing on the wing with Marcel Dion.
Yeah.
And I think the best, he had 38, I think, one year with me on my wing. So, in fact, one year we were the third highest scoring line in the NHL. I think Grant and I and Goldsworthy. And the two lines that beat us was Esposito out of Boston and DeVecchio, Howe, Mahovlich in Detroit. So we had a pretty solid line that year.
Yeah, it's interesting in going back and looking at the hockey of that era. It's what I grew up with, so that's why I have such a passion for it. You finished your career in Washington and had a couple seasons that I'm going to guess were injury ravaged because you didn't play a full season either year. What was that like, and what did you feel like when you knew the end was coming to your career?
Well, Lindsay, they wanted to go with kids here, so they got myself and Nick Libet and Terry Harper. We were all getting moved out, and so when Lindsay says, "I'm going to send you to the World Hockey," and I said, "I'm not going to the World Hockey." So I ended up sitting out about 6 weeks here. And then I finally went in and said, "Ted, if you don't get rid of me and do something, I'm going to sue the organization." So anyway, they give me my free agency, so I go in and sign off with them. And I had made a deal with Washington. I was talking to Washington and Chicago. And Chicago wanted me for that year just as more or less a backup for the playoffs and stuff. But I ended up going to Washington because I had a 2-year contract out of them. But I was going down as a player assistant coach, and I thought that might be an opportunity. But I made the wrong decision. I should have went to Chicago because Washington, the organization was they were feuding inside, and they had a horrible hockey club at the time. But that's the way things go. And if I had gone to a different team, I could have played maybe another year or 2 years as a third line check and centerman, because that's one thing I could always do, and it would have been good. But you have to go to a strong team to do that. For them to just carry you as a third, line checking. You're going to score a few goals, but you're not going to be leading the team or anything like that. But when your legs start going, you know it. So that's part of it.
So would you have been able to fit in down in Chicago with Keith Magnuson, considering the few bouts that you had with him?
Sure. Get along with anybody.
Hey, we've talked a little bit before we set this up, and you talked about how some of the players that you played with in the past are gone away. They passed away. Danny Grant was one that was surprising to me because I hadn't heard about that. You just lost another one. I don't know if you saw Bob Nevin, who's a name that rings a bell with me, played with the North Stars.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I did not know.
He played on the 72-73 team with the Stars, where you guys lost in the playoffs to Philadelphia in 6 games. That must have been at the start of their run of going up and becoming the team. But yeah, it's sad for me to see these guys, older guys that I remember as a kid watching, have passed on.
Yeah.
But
I played with Nevy in New York, and then also in Minnesota for a couple of years. And it's funny, you mentioned Philadelphia when they beat us out that year in 6 games. We won 2 games. I'll give myself a pat in the back. I scored the winning goal in both games.
Well, that's awesome. Those are big goals because you had 2 goals in that series. And again, you spent a little bit of time in the penalty box. Were you like a troublemaker in the NHL,
No.
Or did the referees Bill Friday and a few of those other guys just didn't like you for some reason?
Well, Friday to me he was too busy combing his hair and looking at the plexiglass and trying to find a girlfriend for after the game. I didn't like him as a referee, so that was part of it, I think.
Well, one of the guys that I can remember, Dave Newell, was the guy that I just could not stand as a referee because he always seemed to blow the calls. And maybe you can give me your take on what he was like as a ref.
I'm not sure he was refereeing when I was playing. John D'Amico was there. I remember him. He was a linesman, then became a ref, then he went back being a linesman. But I thought he did a decent job. But anyway, it was just part of it. Art Scove was another pretty good referee.
Yeah.
There was a lot of guys back then that, they were like us. They weren't making a lot of money, but those guys were refereeing, on the road all the time.
Dennis, who was the biggest character that you played with on any of the teams while you were in the show?
I mean, every team generally had somebody. I know when I was in Detroit here, one of the characters was Bugsy Watson, and you never knew what he was going to do. You never knew what he was going to do or say. In Minnesota, we didn't have a lot of characters in there, that were actually really funny or stuff. But we used to have, like this because of JP. We used to have a Christmas party every year, and you had to bring a gag gift for somebody. You'd pull a name out of the hat. Well, I went around and found JP's name, who had it, and I traded him. And JP did not like bugs or small, mice or rats. So I went and bought him a set of white rats, pedigree rats, and wrapped them up in a box. Of course, after the dinner, everybody had to go up and open up their gift in front of everybody. Well, he goes up and he opens up that, and he's just, he's beside himself. Well, he takes him home, and he didn't know what the hell to do with them. And of course, I'm not going to admit that I bought them, but it didn't take long. Now he's got mom and dad, and he's got a whole bunch of young ones. And everybody knew what was going on, so it was just hilarious, and we're all laughing there. But I don't think he ever found out that I gave them to him.
Oh, that'd be interesting to talk to Zach and see what his take was if he was at an age where he knew about that stuff.
I don't even think Zach was born.
No. Okay.
Yep.
It's
JP divorced, and Zach and Joe are from the second marriage.
Okay. JP and my father used to get into practical jokes against each other, and one of the ones I remember my dad telling me was that JP baby powdered his blue wool suit. So my dad got him back by putting paint in his gloves and in his skates, and JP in his French accent was laughing about it because when he was trying to wash it off, the color kept getting darker and darker, and he didn't know what was going on. So lot of stories that I have from when I was a kid growing up and listening to that. How much time did you spend with the Stars when they had Gump Worsley? And did you get to fly with Gump? Because I understand he really liked to fly.
Oh, yeah, he loved it. Yeah, he just had white knuckles all the way. He was back. Well, him and Caesar were there when I first got traded. And then they got Jilly Gilbert in, and they tried to keep 3 goaltenders there, and it wasn't working. But then they traded Jilly to Boston, and that was their future. I mean, the one year, I think we had Bryn Rivard and Pete Lepresti, and it was just horrible, and our defense was going down. You traded the Gibbs away. So, I mean, we were just, you look there, and that was half the reason I got traded, because I opened my mouth up a couple times, and it comes back and bites you in the butt. But,
yeah,
we weren't going anywhere. And then I got traded to Detroit, who had the worst record in the league. And 3 years later, I got the C on my sweater, and we made the playoffs. So that was just part of it. Then the next year, like I said, they didn't want any of the older guys in the team, so they started moving everybody.
Teddy Harris, you got the chance to play with him, and then he ended up out in Philly, I think, at the end of his career and won a Stanley Cup. Do you still stay in touch with Mr. Harris?
No, I don't. I haven't seen him. And I didn't part in good times. I used to room with him sometimes when we're on the road with the North Stars, and we got along well. And then he left. He got traded to, I think, St. Louis, and St. Louis to Philly. And then he came back as a coach, and we were like oil and water. And I don't know why, but that was part of it. And I remember one morning we were just in practice warming up and taking shots at the goaltender. I come down and I scored twice on the goaltender, and both times I shot him up in the top corner. But that's what they're giving you. And then he says, "Get off the ice! You're trying to hurt the goaltenders." So I went off the ice, had a shower, went home, and the next day I got traded to Detroit. So that's how quick that happened.
He was one of the guys that I remember going up to my grandparents' resort, and a nice guy. And I've been trying to reach out to him. I have not had any success in getting a hold of him. I think that he played in Springfield, and I've got a friend who works at an ice rink out in Boston who's got a guy that works for him who goes to all the Springfield Reds and the Springfield Knights, or all the different. They got an annual get together. I don't know if they'll have it this year because of COVID, but he gets involved with that and goes down and loves chatting old time hockey with these guys.
Yeah, I don't know where he is. I heard he was. I heard for a while that he was in New Jersey, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think he's not too far from Philly, and he could be in New Jersey. And I've got some connections within the Flyers organization, and I think that's the way I'm going to have to try to get a hold of him if I can. Dennis, what have you done post-career, and what are your hobbies that you enjoy doing?
Well, my hobbies, start with that first, are downhill skiing and hunting. I generally go out to Vail, Colorado, and ski, and I was been doing that since about '82. Since I got out of the league, I went out to the first time and started skiing, and I just sort of really got attracted to it. And the other thing is, I grew up hunting and guiding and all that. You talk about fishing earlier. I was a fishing guide on Great Bear Lake up in the Northwest Territories one summer when I was in college. So we used to have a lot of fun doing that. And then I migrated to big game hunting. I've been over to Africa, I think 8 times, and really enjoy it. And then, what was the other question? See, at my age, I forget.
Your hobbies, besides hunting and fishing, and what is there anything else that you're doing post-career? You stay involved with hockey at all?
Yeah, I coached kids hockey here in Detroit when I was trying to get started in business. I ended up being a manufacturer rep for 25 years, and then we also ended up buying a plant and being in manufacturing. I was just one of the partners, and then when they had the big shutdown there years ago, when GM claimed bankruptcy and all that, they pretty well buried us because we had too much business with them. You know, like 80% of our business was through GM, and we couldn't absorb the loss and shutting the plant down and all that. So that was part of it. But then I was a high school coach for Vail, Colorado High School for 5 years. So that got me skiing. I used to ski 65, 70 days a year. So that worked out real good. And the last 4 or 5 years, I've just been retired, and like now I'm sitting on the deck, and a lot of times good weather, I sit out here, read and do stuff, but I seem to stay busy.
Well, that's great. And I know that you've got connections to the rink that was in Grand Junction. That was owned by one of the nephews of Richard Zamboni, Alan Coos. And that's when I walked into that rink to visit Alan and I saw your picture. I go, I got to get a hold of this guy because it just goes back, and I have such great memories of watching you play hockey. Dennis, one of the things that I like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was out there with people I know that live in Grand Junction, and they were trying to get a hockey school put together, but they couldn't create the interest. And but anyway, I went there one afternoon, signed some autographs for them, and got to meet some of the people. But I'm not sure if they still have a team out there, a kids team or not. But I know they were really trying to get the minor hockey going.
Yeah, it's the rink is in the process, I believe, of being sold, and it's sad that the city didn't step up and buy it. But when you're a business guy, you got to do what you got to do to pay the bills. And unfortunately, that rink is not going to be there in the future for future generations of hockey players.
Yeah,
Dennis, one of the things that I'm big on is food. What would be your favorite food? And you mentioned being your time in Buffalo. Did they have the wings that they're supposedly famous for in Buffalo at that time? And did you enjoy them?
Yeah, I enjoy buffalo wings, food, but I think Italian would be my favorite. You know, I don't mind a good steak, but the Italian food seems to be, if I had a choice between restaurants, that's where I'd be going.
And do you have a favorite restaurant that you prefer for that food?
No, we move around. We moved 3 years ago. We're up in Rochester. It's about an hour north of Detroit. So we're still trying a lot of them to see what our favorites are. You know, we've got a couple that we go back to off and on, but to say that I've got a favorite that I'm going to go to, you know, once a week or twice a week, so far I haven't developed that.
Okay. The last question I want to ask of you is, you mentioned that you're bringing some stuff up to your son at a fish camp. There's a gentleman who was the engineer for the Red Wings for many years. He came a few years after you left there, and he's got a place in Manistee. Where's your fish camp that you go off to?
Well, I got a hunting place up in Oscoda, Michigan. It's about 3 hours north of where we live here. So
okay.
I got a house on it and 80 acres, and basically it's for deer hunting.
Okay. Well,
My
maybe
son
what I
lives there, it works up in Escoda.
okay. Maybe what I can do is hook you up with Tom Schlang formerly of the Red Wings. He's got a place where he said they're catching without much challenge these days 25, 30-pound lake trout. So I'll have to
Whoa.
get the two of you hooked up.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Okay. Well, we're coming to the end of the episode. We want to thank everyone for listening in to another episode of Ask the Zamboni Experts podcast. If you have a question for one of our experts or an idea for a future episode, please email your questions or request to info@zamboni.com. For more info and additional podcast episodes, please visit zamboni.com/podcast or search Ask the Zamboni Experts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. This is Doug Peters wishing you an ice day.